I know it's a pain in the neck, but it's a patriotic responsibility. It's a patriotic responsibility. Not only if you care about your family.
Before we get into the meat of this video, we need to take a few things into consideration. Here's a study that was done on cell phones about a decade ago.
Cell phone radiation is trending on the heels of a new study in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Researchers found a 7% energy increase in brain tissue closest to the cell phone's antenna.
Look at what they found. The image on the left shows what happened when the cell phone was turned on. The most active areas are in red. Notice the upper right part of the brain. That's the area closest to the antenna. Compare that with this image on the right of the same subject when they had their cell phones turned off.
I confess that after the findings, I changed my behavior.
They also found that just a very short cell phone call would cause children and other people in general to have brainwave disturbances, and it took hours for their brainwaves to return to normal after the phone call. It's also important to remember that a large number of people in the United States are having artificial tinnitus induced in their ears that they can hear. It's also important to remember that scientists and engineers of this whole thing want to use people as antennas to power 6G, which they fully admit here. It's important to remember that NASA and other organizations fully admit that a human man-made bubble of VLF, ELF waves are surrounding Earth now, but they claim it's good for us and that it blocks radiation, saying, quote unquote, I see a suit of armor around the world. That's kind of like climate change, isn't it? Man-made climate change. It's important that science freely admits to auditory response to pulsed radio frequency energy. And you can look this up and research it yourself. There's also a thing called the Fry effect, creating thermal expansion and thus something you can hear in your head. But the most important thing to remember right now is that people like Galen Windsor have done all kinds of work in the past that fully and totally lets us know people who believe that they have an education now do not have an education at all, and all of their education is built on lies. Galen Windsor was huge in the nuclear industry. So any experts that you hear from, people who have been quote unquote schooled or educated, most of them have an education that is built on nothing but bullshit. And that's just a fact.
Galen Windsor has few peers in the world in this area of expertise. They've all chosen to remain silent for reasons which they only know, leaving this man then the burden of leading this lonely battle of exposing what we call the nuclear scare scam.
Out in the reactor began to sneak in people who wanted a radiation monitor behind every reactor operator. Why? We know how to make these things run. When we got a metal fuel element stuck and it fell down on the trampoline back of the reactor, we'd go in with our feet and kick it off into the pool. Finally, along came a rule maker that says, thou shalt not do that. You'll get burned. Turns out that in 1934, the International Commission on Radiation Protection fabricated a limit.
Galen Windsor bathed in nuclear water. He ate uranium. He died at 84. Galen Windsor spent his life basically shitting all over the modern educational system. Inadvertently, that is what he was doing. So you have to remember that most of the experts that are out there, the quote-unquote experts, they don't know shit, and their education is built on bullshit. So they wanted you scared of what you could see, photos of nuclear arms, and all the while, you were never getting an education on what you couldn't see. On this channel, you've heard a lot about the signal, the vast, widespread signal. Now, what we are going to talk about is the beta test, one of the many beta tests of the signal that we are dealing with now. Is it the exact same frequency? No, probably not. But it is a beta test of the exact same thing. In 1978, they found a signal which ended up being called the Eugene signal. That signal was on the ground, in the homes, and up to 3,000 feet above the city. What was that signal doing? It was affecting people in their homes. When they would leave certain homes, the symptoms would go away. When they would enter the home, it would come back. Some people had symptoms outside the home, but it was mainly in the home. Now, people could have easily thought that somebody was doing something to their house, but they didn't. What happened with this signal? Well, it came on very, very much like the hum. And a man named Walter Toposky, he reported vibrations in his home, insomnia, burning of his cornea, voices, hearing voices talking around his house, and over 150 other people complained of the exact same symptoms. Headaches, insomnia, coordination problems, ear and throat problems, and more. So a guy named Van Aert came in and he studied Toposky's home. When he was in there, he also noticed the signal and he began to get the same symptoms as Toposky. Then eventually Van Aert also noticed the signal in his own home, which he described as a high-pitched and barely audible sound with stuffiness in both ears and reddening of his skin. Pretty interesting, right? This was the beta test of what is going on today. It's just a vast signal everywhere. Back then, they didn't have the technology that they have today. There wasn't a cell tower on every corner, a Wi-Fi router everywhere. There wasn't the same technology to even pulse on the grid. So there was a signal in place over the city, creating a field over the entire area. And then this would ride on the power lines, piggyback, and ride into the homes. And when you're encased in electrical wiring by pulsed frequencies, the symptoms are going to be greater. And that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly what they found it was. It was a pulsed radio frequency signal. Now, the signal was allegedly 4.75 megahertz, which affected every home to a stronger or lesser degree. You know, there's underlying factors there. How many electronics do you have in your home? How is it wired? Are there wiring problems? Are there grounding problems? There are all kinds of factors there. And it was allegedly 500,000 watts. No one wanted to touch the case. Now, this is at the same time that the United States was telling people that Russian research is scientifically implausible, right? While they're doing these same types of tests. At the same time, they were quietly admitting that EMF affects moods just like drugs. They were also quietly admitting that EMF and radio frequency can affect the mood and emotional states of people and animals, right? This is a big deal. This was a beta test, and this went on for a few years. This was a beta test. Now, of course, it was never solved because they investigate themselves. It was found to be a radio signal with no health issues, and the EPA first said that it was an unidentified radio signal that was tracked back to a Navy transmitter, right? But later, the EPA had a press conference, and they said it was not a signal at all. It was nothing. They always do this shit, right? So what Eugene was dealing with between 76 and 79 or 80 is the exact same thing that we are dealing with now all over the world. Vibrations. People hear voices, redness of skin, problems with ears, nose, throat, attention span problems, mood problems, problems with their coordination. Everything that we are dealing with now, Eugene, Oregon was dealing with in 1978 and all around that time period. The modern signal is much higher. I have documented it at 75, 85,000 feet in recordings. It's been recorded underground, in caves, in water, everywhere. This is a vast signal spanning the whole Western world, at least. I have documented it pretty much everywhere. And the symptoms that people are dealing with now are identical to what people were dealing with before in Eugene, Oregon. But the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is Eugene, Oregon, and the Eugene signal. This was a beta test for everything that I talk about on this channel. A complete and total beta test. So it's important to remember that people began to hear the hum between like 1990 and 1993. And the hum was documented everywhere. People began to hear this in their ears, in their head, basically. They would take people down into caves and they couldn't get away from it. In fact, it would get louder. So clearly, it is an ELF signal that is having an effect on them. So the hum came on right around the same time that HAARP came online. And lots of these people are having the exact same symptoms people in Eugene, Oregon had. Then you'll get these people that want to talk about the hum in a certain area, in Zug Island, in Detroit, in like Taos, New Mexico, or other areas. It's not the area. It's not the factory. Just like the houses in Oregon, there is an issue or a perfect storm, if you will, creating the right set of circumstances for the hum to become very audible in that area, whether it is vibrating off and piggybacking on already existing vibrations, or due to bad grounding, or whatever the case may be. That is why it is happening. Not because it's the area. You know, it is just asinine to think like that when it is everywhere. People need to get their heads out of their asses when it comes to this. And their miseducation is most of the battle there. The Eugene signal in Eugene, Oregon was a beta test for exactly what is going on now. And that's it for now. Look out for Charlie.
I know it's a pain in the neck, but it's a patriotic responsibility. It's a patriotic responsibility. Not only if you care about your family.